got it clean. There's nobody left alive down there.
Land is about 300 meters, right where that big tree is out there. 300 to 400 meters southeast of the town. Okay, let's go.
They took the young and the brave.
It's quite emotional to try to patch these kids up. You know, I mean, I wasn't much older. They were probably 18 and 19, and I was 20.
To consume alcohol or go in a bar, I had to be 21. I was only 19.
Driver, finish secure. Let's get the hell out. Okay, talk to me. We're coming out.
And dropped them into fierce battles in a jungle far from their desert homes.
The Viet Cong and NVA rule the night.
Military people don't love war, but it is our job. We signed up for it, and that's what we're all about.
For some, their service wasn't optional, and returning alive to Arizona wasn't guaranteed. Over 600 Arizonans were killed.
You know damn well you're gonna lose friends. But I did not expect to do so many.
Most of those that did return came back with scars on their bodies and in their minds.
A lot of landmine injuries, so, amputated legs, a lot of shrapnel, gunshot wounds, blast injuries.
I had PTSD. I remember they told me they thought I was a schizophrenic. And I don't know what the hell a schizophrenic was until I went and asked somebody.
It wasn't a welcoming party, coming back. Jesus Christ, coming back here, and nobody wanted to give you a job or anything.
Arizonans played a crucial role.
I'm incredibly proud of my service and the opportunity to serve the country. And that given the chance to do it again, I would do it again.
The Vietnam conflict was a war that had ensnarled many countries for decades, even before the mid-1960s, when the United States became heavily involved.
The major buildup of U.S. forces starts in the summer of 1965. So between 1965 and 1968, when it hits its height at about 550,000 troops, you see a significant escalation. High numbers of Mexican Americans from many of the smaller communities are the first ones taken. So it generally fell, especially the frontline fighting, as opposed to the officer corps, which is a different story, fell to the lower middle class, working class kids, off the farms, out of the mines, factories. And were taken and put into primarily, a lot of times, the frontline troops in Vietnam.
I grew up here in Douglas. When the smelter was going strong, that was the main employer in town.
I was born in Nogales, Arizona. We actually went to Sarita for the first 2 years. Then we moved to Tucson. I started in Tucson at 3rd grade.
I was born in Puertoville, Arizona.
I was born in Agua Prieta, Sonora, Mexico. I came to Arizona. I went to work in San Simon, Arizona.
We came out here to Phoenix, Arizona. We went everywhere barefooted. And I do recall that when it was the middle of the summer, you had to kind of pick your steps from shade spot to shade spot. You didn't just walk on that very, very hot asphalt.
In the 1960s, Arizona's population was well below 2 million people and was spread out over much of the state. Midwesterners didn't flock to Phoenix and Tucson until late in the decade, after the widespread adoption of air conditioning. Mirroring our changing population, Arizona's Vietnam veterans came from a mix of native-born and transplanted. Some arrived after the war was over. At the time, Arizona's main military installations were the Army's Fort Huachuca in Sierra Vista, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, and 2 Air Force bases in Phoenix, Luke and Williams.
I got checked out in the F-100 at Luke.
After I got my wings, I went to Luke and got my first assignment to F-100, so that was 6 months of training at Luke.
I went to Williams Air Force Base up in Phoenix for pilot training. Williams was the first choice of the bases because it had the new T-38 aircraft, the new supersonic aircraft.
The vast majority of the people who served in Vietnam did so not in the air, but on the ground. 65% of the over 58,000 deaths in Vietnam were soldiers in the Army. And the Army is likely where you were destined if you were drafted.
We see the first peacetime draft in 1947. So as soon as the Cold War starts in the aftermath of World War II, the draft is implemented. So from really 46 through 1974, you have a draft that is a fundamental part of every young man's life in the United States. They're from primarily lower middle class, working class groups, because they didn't have the tools available to them to avoid the draft. There were draft deferments for college students through 1967. High numbers of Mexican Americans from many of the smaller communities are the first ones taken because they're not going off like many of the others to college. And so, that affects it.
The draft picked me up as soon as I dropped out. I got that letter, from Uncle Sam saying, "Greetings, you have been inducted into the Armed Forces of the United States. You have to report in the Phoenix area."
I was working at Hughes Aircraft, which is right there now. December 10th, 1966, I got a letter in the mail. It said, "Greetings from the President of the United States." And he told me that, I was being inducted into the United States Army Forces.
Actually, I never went to school here in the United States. As a matter of fact, I got a letter on April 19, 1969. It was right on my birthday. It was drafted. I was still a citizen in Mexico.
While foreign male citizens were drafted, women were not.
Well, at the time, when I was in high school, there were really about 3, maybe 4 things that women could do. That was be a nurse, be a teacher, get married, or be a secretary. So I chose the nurse. I was, a graduate nurse, and I wanted, to find something else to do instead of just working in a hospital in the United States. So when one of the recruiters from the Navy came out, I really liked the uniforms a lot better than the Army and the Air Force. They were kind of dull compared to the Navy.
I was put into the United States Army Reserve and called up immediately after my residency was completed in surgery. It was the equivalent of a doctor draft, but for political purposes, the word draft was not being used.
Many people had reasons for not waiting to be drafted and enlisted instead.
And I didn't really have the money for college. I had a pretty good idea I was going to end up in Vietnam. And so I decided I would enlist, go in the Marine Corps, where I could get the best training to survive Vietnam.
I had 5 uncles that served all in the Pacific. They were all in the Navy. And we grew up here in a patriotic environment here in Douglas, and it was your duty to go and serve your country, because that was my dad's generation and my uncles.
There's this, and especially I think that's strongest in the Latino community, to prove that they're just as American as the ones that, are telling them they're not American because they maybe speak Spanish at home or their families maybe only been here a generation or 2. And so they're out to prove their Americanness. These are tough, hard-nosed kids. Play football, wrestle, and, they hunt. They're raised, be Boy Scouts. And, this is part of their duty as what it was to be a man.
Dick Barber was in the first class at Pueblo High School to attend the school for all 4 years. His last year was one that impacted him forever.
When I was a senior in high school, 13 people that were very close to me died. My father died. My girlfriend's father died. My best friend's mother died. My Boy Scout master died. The next door neighbor was killed in an accident. One of my uncles died. So these were not just people I casually knew. These were people that were really important in my life. And it really had a real impact on how I felt about life and how I felt not only about my own life, but about other people's lives. Every male who was 18 had to go to their local draft board and sign up for the draft. I went down faithfully to sign up. There was a woman there, and she said, "I guess you're here to sign up." And I said, "I'm going to sign up for the draft, but I will tell you that I have just seen so many people die that I don't intend to kill anybody." And she said, "Are you a conscientious objector?" I said, "I have no idea what a conscientious objector is. Never heard the term before." And she said, "Well, a conscientious objector is a person who refuses to serve in the military." I said, "That's me." I said, "I am not going to kill anybody." I said, "You can do whatever you want to with me, but I am not going to kill anybody."
Dick spent the next few years in and out of college at the University of Arizona. Following a required stint in ROTC, he was finally classified as a conscientious objector.
And I found out later that I was one of, I think, 2 people that draft board number 42 gave that conscientious objector status to.
Pilots in Vietnam came from a group of men who enlisted. Competition to become a pilot, especially a fighter pilot, was at times fierce among those in flight school, many of whom shared a lifelong desire to fly.
After I started flying then at Phoenix College, I applied for the Air Force. I wanted to be a pilot and ended up getting my wings. Then I was selected to go on to advanced jet training, and that was done at Williams Air Force Base, and flying the F-86. And of course, wow, is that cool, because not only was I flying F-86s, but I was doing it in my own home backyard. And so that was quite a great deal.
There was no hesitation on my part. Helicopter pilots had a disproportionately higher number of casualties than other job descriptions in that period, but I was anxious and willing to serve.
For many entering the service, this would be the first trip of more than a few miles from their homes.
From Phoenix, I just went to Texas, Fort Bliss, Texas, where I was trained for jungle warfare.
To be honest, I didn't speak English when I was in training.
This is the best friend that you'll ever have.
I had a good friend of mine that Richard Calderon. He used to tell me, everything, about what was going on, on the classes that we had during training. He said, just copy everything from the blackboard, and then I explain to you what's going on.
And then the colonel, the first thing he tells us is look around. He says, look who's behind you, next to you, in front of you, look around, he says. So we look around and says, some of you are not coming back. If you do come back, you come in the back.
My Navy boot camp was in San Diego. And one day they were asking for volunteers to go over to MCRD, which was the Marine Recruit Depot, because they needed corpsmen over there. I jumped on it, So even though I was in the Navy for 4 years, almost 3 years, I spent with the Marine Corps.
When training was completed, bases in South Vietnam were the next stop after a brief visit back home. Some recruits were flown directly from the desert to the jungle in a matter of days.
It was on fire. One of the first things I remember flying into Da Nang Airport was stepping off the plane. There was smoke everywhere. And it wasn't necessarily from explosions from combat and everything. There was, later I find out, that you're burning the latrines, and I mean, there was just smoke everywhere.
As soon as you open up the doors, you can feel the heat, the humidity. I got there in March of '69, and you can just feel the humidity and the heat like that.
It was a whole new world. Very hot, very, very hot, very muggy. Didn't know where to go here or there, and it was just confusion.
And when I got in Vietnam, I had that like an eerie feeling, But it didn't look that bad because it was daytime. And the night is when it was, you would think that there were falling stars, but it was bullets everywhere.
Got there late in the afternoon, got a shower, got in bed, and just wanted to sleep. The air raid sirens went off, and we were given instructions that if you hear the air raid sirens, you put your flak jacket on, you put your helmet on, and you climb under your bunk. Well, back then, most women put curlers in their hair every night. So here I was, laying in bed with curlers, and then the siren goes off. The first thing I did was try to put the helmet on, but of course it didn't fit very well. I put the flak jacket on, and I just got under the bunk, and I fell asleep.
For the pilots, the journey to Vietnam was quite different. Some pilots were stationed at Air Force bases in nearby countries and were put to work flying missions into Vietnam.
My first duty assignment in Vietnam was actually in Thailand in the 1965 time period. We, 2 days to quote, get acclimated. It was 105 degrees in April. Every afternoon it would have a thunderstorm that would drop 6 inches of moisture. The cobras were swimming around in the water underneath the buildings.
A lot of people wanted to get to Vietnam because everybody figured it'll be over tomorrow. This is going to be over tomorrow. The Yanks are coming. We're fighting a bunch of third world country people. Once we show them what we can do, it's going to change the outcome. So were we wrong?
I wanted to go to Vietnam, volunteered for it. I remember when I left for the war, and I was really, really excited. And I turned around and looked at my wife, and she was crying. And I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, I'm going to be a fighter pilot in a real war, a war for men with hair on their chests. And there's missiles and MiGs, and our bases are rocketed, mortars at night. Our bases are under attack. I mean, what's not to like about this? This is everything I've dreamed about. Many decades later, I understand clearly, why she was concerned, and she worried every day the whole time I was over there.
Oscar Juliet, please. Bad one. Bad one, Oscar Juliet, go.
Once there, everyone had a job to do. For some, it was combat in close quarters, where you had to use all your senses just to stay alive.
There's not a lot of combat. Most of our combat that we engaged in was at night. Most of the booby traps and that we also engaged in was during daytime, and we would do search and destroy missions and sweep for bunkers and that type of thing on a little piece of land over there called HANOI Island. There was just booby trap after booby trap after booby trap. Because I'm Native American, and I kind of viewed the war a little differently, especially some of the components of combat over there. One of my first things that I did, and I really couldn't explain it initially, but the first time that I had combat and there was a kill, I wanted to smell that person's hair. I wanted to smell his clothing. I wanted to see what my enemy looked like close up. I wanted to be able to sense the enemy in my presence before he sensed me. In Vietnam, I felt comfortable. Some of the guys thought that was kind of a odd, crazy thing. But I always felt over there that I was somewhat protected because of my cultural beliefs.
Thoughts, letters, and care packages from home helped Arizonans to adapt and survive. Reminders of home and civilian life came in many forms.
We're four brothers. All four of us served at the same time. My older brother, Henry, never made it to Vietnam. All other three of us did. We were in the middle of the Mekong Delta. Our jobs were to supply feed and sleeping quarters and supply the ammo and everything for the different Navy outfits that were there. And there was quite a few of them. My wife, I asked her to send me some watermelon and melon seed, because this is sandy soil that's brought up. It's rich sandy soil from the bottom of the Mekong River, and it's sitting up there on top on the hot sun, ideal for watermelon and melons. So I was growing them, and everybody was having fun.
We used to get a lot of mail. As a matter of fact, packages. I used to get food from my mom. My mom used to send me food from here, like canned tamales, canned enchiladas, and chili jalapenos, you know, and we just ate it all, you know, all of us. I'm Catholic, and we used to have services out in the field. In Vietnam, we used to put like ammo boxes, you know, and then the chaplain, he just put like a tablecloth, and then he put a cross, and then he did you know, all the services, and we just kneeling down or sitting down, and you know, out in the field, you know, and it was good for us, you know, because we felt close to God, you know, and he gave us communion and blessed us and everything, you know. That was a good. I think we got it like maybe once a month. As a matter of fact, I was in Fire Base Birmingham when an officer, I believe was a lieutenant, came to me and he said, "Specialist Tapia?" I said, "Yes." "You know, you're not a U.S. citizen?" "I'm not a U.S. citizen, you know." He said, "You know, you're not supposed to be here." I said, "What am I doing here? You know, I'm here." I never had a chance to do it to Mexico, to be in the armed forces in Mexico. But now that I'm here in the United States Armed Forces, you know, I felt like I was proud. I'm proud of it. I was proud then, and I'm still proud of it.
Pride and patriotism went a long way, but in the end, for those in combat, it was one person against another.
I think the first time that I shot one, it was, I felt something that I didn't like, you know, what am I doing kind of a thing, you know. But it was him or me. There was no time to think about it, no hesitation at all.
I feel very fortunate that I didn't get put in with the infantry, okay, because the infantry had it very bad, you know. You know, they were out there actually, you know, out there trying to make contact with the enemy, and we in field artillery would shoot support. You would just shoot these rounds into different areas that they would go and find for their suspected activity. And that's what our job was. It was like being a fireman. You were on call 24/7, 360, you know, for the, you know, that's all he did was shoot the gun and maintain the gun. I got back in March of 1970. I was 19 years old, trying to go to these college bars, you know, and the bouncer told me I couldn't go in there and drink, and I should tell him off. After I was out here in the civilian world for about 6 months, I don't know, one day I was there in Tempe, Arizona, and I said, screw it, I can't find a good job or anything like that. So I went down and saw the Army recruiter, and a month later I was back in Vietnam in September of 1970. I was completely out of the military. I didn't have to go back. I went and re-enlisted, actually, to go back to Vietnam. But I got stationed this time with A Battery, 3rd of the 18th Field Artillery, which was an 8-inch howitzer. It shot an artillery shell that weighed 190 pounds, shot it for about 12 miles. But it was basically about the same thing, But when I got back there the second time, one day I questioned myself, I said to myself, what the heck are you doing back here again, But then I said to myself, well, it's too late now. You're here again, so you might as well just make the best of it,
Keith Connolly also served 2 tours in Vietnam. His return to combat was required for him to be trained in a newer fighter jet.
I flew the F-4 then, Phantom, from a place called Cam Bay. Well, the F-4 missions were, believe it or not, very, very similar to a lot of the targeting that we did in the F-100. Matter of fact, we hit many of the same targets in 1969 that I had been hitting in 1965. The Viet Cong were using those areas just like they were in the earlier days. We were then not allowed to go into North Vietnam, but we were going into Laos. Laos was kind of interesting because we weren't supposed to be there. You couldn't tell people that we were there. In 1969, things had changed, okay? One, it was no longer a, quote, adventure. So when I went back in 1969, it was the beginning of what I call the disillusionment of Vietnam, meaning my wife, as an example, was then staying in a home that we rented in Phoenix, Arizona, because our family was there. And when our neighbors found out that I was in Vietnam as a pilot, they wouldn't talk to her. They shunned her. So that was the start of that sort of activity, if you will.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.
By the later 1960s, the anti-war movement was expanding throughout the United States. Protesters objected to the war for religious, moral, political, and personal reasons. In each community across the country, the tone and vehemence of protest reflected local values, especially here in Arizona.
There really wasn't much of one. If it was primarily here at the University of Arizona. You weren't going to be an anti-war protester in Morenci, Arizona, or in Ajo. You would have been seen too much out on the step with the community standards. But here at the University of Arizona, there was some. At ASU, they'd walk around in their uniforms, and there was never any problems. But it was mixed with race relations, so it blended in many ways with the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. But in the smaller communities, it wasn't very present.
After training in the F-100 fighter at Luke Air Force Base, Bob Breault fell in love with Arizona, which is where he returned after serving one short tour of duty in a very unsuccessful program. That mission was designed to draw the fire of enemy surface-to-air missiles, and it commenced with 7 planes and 12 pilots. 45 days later, all the planes were shot down and half the pilots killed or captured.
I was only there flying for about 45 days because there were no more planes. And I had so few hours, only had 400 hours in the plane, so I was scratching their heads. Well, what do we do to this guy? As a regular commission officer, I'm moving up very fast, promoted below the grade. I was flight lead, instructor pilot, all this kind of stuff below the grade. So I was headed to a successful Air Force career. And then I gave it up, and I had applied to Stewart Observatory, but they already had their registrations closed. They said there was a new optical science center that just opened, and they had passed my application to them, and they said they would accept me. And I drive up Cherry, and the steam shovel is in the hole, digging a hole for the Optical Science Center. But there was no building. Probably one of the sickest moments I ever had as a married man. Dude, I wasn't going around in a uniform. You just played a low key and you were a regular kid in class. And if they knew what you did, then you may get some caustic words. And they had protests. And there weren't any campus police around to chase them away or anything like that.
If we were to stay here too much longer, we wouldn't have much left of this platoon, let alone the company.
With vivid and often gruesome images of the war on the nightly news, the anti-war movement had plenty to fuel their protests. The Tet Offensive was a turning point in the war, and not only militarily. On January 31st, 1968, over 70,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops simultaneously launched attacks against U.S. forces and its allies across South Vietnam.
Now, I was airborne on the first mission of the morning on Tet. So we got airborne about first light, and we're heading for North Vietnam. We're looking down over South Vietnam, and every city is under attack. Firefights going on, smoke plumes. So it was a really, really desperately difficult time. The Tet Offensive lasted for the better part of a month. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong did not win one battle. Did not win one battle. We decimated them. And of course, what that did was it raised the suspicions of the American people that this war is not worth it. In other words, basically, we've been told that there's light at the end of the tunnel, we're making progress, and now the whole nation is under attack. And it really, really played into the hands of the anti-war movement over there. We saw that there wasn't light at the end of the tunnel. And so the military victories in the battles that we fought were meaningless. We won the battles, we lost the war. And the Tet was the start of it, and then it got worse after Tet, of course.
And there were many battles to come.
You were pitted against some of the finest light infantry in the world, men who were disciplined, who had good fire support control, who were the enemy. And they were very dedicated to killing you and to evading observation from you. So you learned how to hunt the ultimate game, which was man. We would launch before the sun would come up, and we would put the sun behind us in a position that we could watch the last little wisps of campfires as the enemy was having breakfast and closing down their encampments from the night before for their daytime hide. And we'd catch that last little bit of smoke, and we would go to that campfire, and under a bush you would find a foot sticking out. And you would engage that enemy, and you'd get out of the area as quickly as you could after the engagement. And then you would return to try to find his friends, taking care of him, administering first aid, or evacuating a casualty or the body, whatever it may be. Then you would engage them, and you'd leave again. And then you would come back. You got very proficient at the art of understanding the direction of movement from the footprints on the trail. If you had rain the day before and you had water standing in the footprint on the trail, you could not only tell the direction of movement, but you could determine how heavily a man was loaded and what direction he was moving in. And then you tried to follow that to a location where they were in a hide for the day and develop the situation. Just like hunting.
We had these incoming bombs hitting everywhere. And I started running toward the bunker, and when I went like this, I could see the fragments of the bomb flying past me like this, like that, everywhere, hitting the ground. As I got hit with one of them right here in my leg. My leg went flying out that way, and I fell on the ground. And I could still see the pieces flying everywhere. And then I was looking like this, and I see one of my buddies there. He got hit in the stomach. He was holding like this, his belly, And he would go like this, and blood was pouring out. And then when I turned around like this, I seen one of the guys got here in the shoulder. And the whole shoulder blade went out like this. I went into the bunker. I got the M60 machine gun there, and I was firing everywhere like this, just wiping everything out. And then the medics came out, hold the fire, hold the firing. They came to me, and I was still firing the M60, and he said, oh, gee whiz, this guy is in shock, you know. Let's get him out. And they grabbed me and pulled me out. I looked down, and I see just a big pool of blood. And then they got me, and they cut the pants out of here. They pegged my wound with a lot of cotton, and then they wrapped it and wrapped it and wrapped it, and they call in the helicopters.
In the Army, the first line of care for the wounded were medics. For the Marines, it was Navy corpsmen.
Navy corpsmen are only kept in the bush 6 months because of the life expectancy is not real high. Being a corpsman was purely volunteer at that point, so our numbers were not great. Usually a squad would leave the compound, daybreak, and there would anywhere from 12 to 15 men in a squad, and you would be out there most of the day. And there were only 2 corpsmen in my platoon. In other words, if I went out on a daytime patrol and we got back in, that night I would have to go out with another squad on an ambush. And I was usually in the middle of the squad, depending on whatever number it was, I was in the middle, because if we ever got hit and somebody got hit hard somewhere, well, I could go either direction to get to them. Too many times I had to crawl on my belly and, get to Marines. And first of all, I wanted to see what kind of wound they had, and I mean, I've stuck my fingers and thumbs in holes to stop the bleeding. Some of the worst were amputations, types of that. Man, I got to put a tourniquet on them, and I mean, I remember one kid from Texas, and his legs, both the legs were pulverized, and I got tourniquets on him, and we made a makeshift stretcher out of a poncho, and we called in a medevac. The other Marines helped me lift him onto the poncho. We picked up his body. He was still quite alive. And while we picked up his torso, some other Marines lifted up both his legs to get him on the poncho with him. And, I mean, then you just hope that the medevac gets there as quickly as possible. I saw too many of those.
A Huey can hold 6 or 8 casualties. The most that we ever had come in on a Huey was 24 casualties, 3 of whom were hanging from the struts. With any wounds that had occurred out in the mud and the crud of where the fighting was going on were assumed to be contaminated wounds. And as such, the guidelines were you don't close any of those at the primary care. You clean them very thoroughly, you remove any dead tissue, and you pack them open. And they all went on antibiotics, and if they were looking good, 3 days later you returned them to the operating room, cleaned the wounds again thoroughly, and then you could close them. And if they were basically just a couple of small wounds on a person who was active duty and everything was looking good, they could be held in what was called medical hold for 10 to 14 days, or even shorter if appropriate, and went back to battle. I remember the time that I had been operating on and off and constantly, and I kept going and I kept going and kept going. When they got to the point where they saw me get down on my hands and knees and bang my head on the floor trying to wake myself back up, one of the guys said, "Get out of here and go back and get some rest," which I did. The issue of those that die in your hands, you do your best as far as you can if you think there's salvageability, but there's a point at which it's too much and it overcomes you, and you just have to go on to the next issue, but it hurts.
Navy nurse Ann Gartner was stationed on the USS Sanctuary, anchored off the coast.
Emergency medevac, ASAP. Top priority.
Out of necessity, her patients arrived aboard a helicopter too.
Depending on how much action was occurring in the battlefields, we would get soldiers still with their, weapons, with hand grenades, all kinds of weaponry that the sergeant at arms had to go through and check the patient before they could start doing the triage. A lot of landmine injuries, so amputated legs, a lot of shrapnel, gunshot wounds, blast injuries, so it was pretty extensive. And some of the nurses just did not do well. So we were fortunate that we had a chief nurse that if you were having problems, then they would put you on a ward that maybe wasn't as ghastly as, let's say, ICU or some of the surgical units. One of the assignments that I had was in the international ward, where we took care of a lot of the Vietnamese children, especially ones that had need for plastic surgery or broken bones or various things like that. That was our international ward. I worked there for a number of months. Junior nurses would usually get the PM and the night shift, and the more senior would be during the day. But we rotated enough that we got a pretty good experience at different different times of the day, because we received patients from the field all times of the day. I don't know if you're ever really prepared for what you see over there. Some of the injuries were pretty devastating, and you learned you had to kind of let it go and take care of the patients, because that's what we were there for, is to take care of the patients.
Some of the people who most needed medical care were given virtually none. POWs, prisoners of war. On his 43rd mission, Bob Barnett was shot down by a surface-to-air missile over North Vietnam. He eluded capture for several days until a dog alerted the enemy to his hiding place.
They threw me in the back of a truck and took me into the HANOI HILTON. And stayed in there for 6 days and kept awake, and they put me in ropes and interrogated me. And then they put me into solitary confinement. And I was there for about a month, and then I went to the zoo, and that's where I spent the next 3 years. We'd get up, and this cellmate and I, the cell was maybe, 10 feet by 10 feet. And we had our 2 bedboards, and we'd walk around in circles for an hour. We probably walked from Los Angeles to New York and back. They'd catch you communicating, they'd make you be on your knees and hold your hand up for a couple of days at a time, stuff like that. I was so sneaky they never caught me. I think I communicated almost every day. I always was optimistic. I operated under the idea that if I could just get through the next 3 months, because I'm going to be out of here in 3 months. If I'd really known that I was going to be there that long from day one, it would have been a lot harder, I think. And it was hard as it was. It was very hard. And I was in the 3rd group that came out on March 14th, 1973. My wife waited, and we went on with our life. She did a really good job. And My daughter was 6 when I left and 13 when I came back.
After his return, Colonel Barnett would become the head of Air Force ROTC at the University of Arizona. The U.S. involvement in Vietnam began and ended in an advisory role. Those receiving the advice were soldiers of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnamese fighting to keep their country democratic against the communist North Vietnamese aggressors. Some of the former ARVN soldiers would eventually become Arizonans.
I was drafted to the Army in 1973. At that time, because I just joining, and I'm just a second lieutenant, you're not up there to understand exactly what's going to happen. But at the time, I feel like, oh, it's nothing wrong. The war is just keep fighting, just like the last 15, 20 years before I was born. So I feel really comfortable. We think that, the company will not be able to take it over the South. So at the time, I feel very comfortable.
All the South Vietnamese army, we fight to the end. And then they surrender. The last president tell everybody surrender. But unfortunately for me, because I still have my family in Saigon, I can't leave. After that, they put me in a re-education camp. We call jail, we don't call re-education camp.
All the South Vietnam officer, have go to the re-education camp. A lot of my friends have died in the camp, That's a hard labor camp.
I escaped them, 1979. We got out with the small boat. That's why I got out of the country. They're lucky for me, I'm okay. Some they die in the ocean. Because you go with a small boat. My boat, 202 people, but it's a small boat. You run out of food, run out of water.
All my family, left Vietnam in 1975. And lucky, I escaped on May 1980. Our boat almost sank, but luckily, we have to save by the inland ship. And about 121 people in our boat, My family, living in Tucson, Arizona, and some saw for me go to Tucson, live with them.
The U.S. men and women who had fought alongside the ARVN eventually made it home too. Most tours of duty lasted 1 year, some more, some less. The welcome they received was nothing like the victory parades held for the returning World War II veterans.
It was one of the days that we got resupplied. I got a lieutenant, an officer, he come up and said that I had a few days left. So, I said my goodbyes, my hugs, and my tears, and my adios. At the airport, I kissed the ground. The airport, I kissed the ground. There was nobody waiting for me. Took a taxi home. I wasn't expected. I do with my mom. She was the only one home. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe it.
I don't think I could sleep at all for 8 days. 8 days straight. Did not get any sleep at all. I was different from when I left to go to Vietnam and when I came back. I could not go anywhere. I could not be with people. I was not social, and I just went hide. Finally, I started to go to church. When I started to go to church, I started kind of socializing with people, getting better and better and better.
Oh, when I came back, it was so hard to get a job here. Once you tell them you were from a Vietnam veteran, and I was afraid to say that because they didn't want to give you a job.
I had 2 tours in the 105 and one in 65 for 4 months, and then went back in 69 and flew another 8 months. When I came back from the 65 tour and from the 69 tour, I had people walk up to me and spit on me in the airport. All that kind of stuff, you know. I just would rather not talk about it because it just so frustrated me and so upset me.
It really never struck me until coming back. I was trying to find the gate that I was going out of, and there were protesters in the airport, and I was spat on. So after that, I went into the ladies' room, and I took my bars off, and I took my cover off, and I just looked like I had a black coat on.
The scars and the memories from the Vietnam War changed America and Arizona. The divides in our society, laid bare by the war, changed communities throughout the country. And most important, it profoundly changed the people who had proudly served in the Vietnam War. The roots of these memories and experiences are even now still coming to light.
All stories matter, whether they seem small or large. We don't need to understand who the heroes were. We need to understand who all these people were and sort of create sort of a composite to try to better understand what it's like to go to war and then what it's like as our society to deal with people who come back from war. When you go to war, you carry that war with you for the rest of your life. So you're forever a soldier, whether you go back and become an engineer, a medical doctor, whatever it may be. You're a forever soldier.
I've been diagnosed with PTSD, and I'm certainly not ashamed of it. I write short stories about my experience. I choose not to write about the most tragic events. I just, I remember them very well, just as though they happened yesterday. I don't want to forget. But not a day goes by that I don't think about something that happened over there. I'm a patriot, and I'm proud of my military service, just like so many of us are. I'm glad that there are people around that are finally looking at us Vietnam veterans in a different light. And, even though it was an unpopular time, hundreds of thousands of us served.
Hey, we're the best America had to offer. It's just they didn't stand behind us. And if I could have changed anything, it would have been that. I'd have became more knowledgeable when I came home, and I didn't. I let it fester and fester and fester. And unfortunately, my kids and my grandkids paid the price for it. So, I'd love to have changed that.
I have no regrets about the stand that I took. I would do it again. I think you have to decide what your convictions are. And, have 13 people die in 6 months. Those 13 people were important enough for me to say, I value your life, and I'm not going to take anybody else's because I value your life.
I never did anything over there that I was ashamed of. And I have had people ask me, young kids ask me, did you ever kill anybody? And my answer to them was, I never killed anyone that wasn't trying desperately to kill me. I didn't violate any rules. I didn't bomb any villages. I didn't do anything that I was ever ashamed of at all. So I don't have anything, but I believed in what I was doing. And I believed in what we were doing was worthwhile. Gradually, over time, I've realized what a mistake the war was, and realized that we should not have gotten ourselves into what essentially was a civil war in Vietnam over there. And we ended up losing. And the reason we ended up losing was because the American public figured out that it wasn't worthwhile sending their kids and grandkids into a war that was endless over there, with no end in sight.
When you go to war, you see life in a totally different perspective. This has never been a good war. Never will be a good war. There are no winners in a war. You don't win a war. You might end it, but there are never really any winners. I can tell you there wasn't anybody that shirked their duty. They fought just as hard as they could, given the set of circumstances, as long as we were told to do the mission. So it was frustrating that we were there, that we fought, and we didn't get a clear victory.
I would say it certainly impacted me forever. And every day I do something to serve Uncle Sam, and I'm proud to do it. And that's in memory of the guys who didn't make it.